All right, welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. This is part one of lecture 7 on social justice. So, throughout this course, we've been looking at and critiquing a set of fundamental philosophical beliefs. The conceptual scaffolding that holds together our understanding of our world and ourselves. We've looked at syllogistic, deductive, inferential engines that automate and mathematize the process of reasoning. When it seemed like this view threatened to trap us within our own deterministic clockwork, we looked at how Enlightenment philosophers secured the human mind within the Cartesian theater while exiling everything else to the vast indifference of the Humean mosaic. We saw how this creates a crisis of epiphenomenalism, where we can watch the external world but never actually participate in it. This contradicts our feeling from the inside that there is something that it's like to engage with the world both freely and ethically, while situating us within a disembodied view from nowhere, from which we can observe no atoms of justice or molecules of mercy. So in this final lecture, we're going to pull the camera back, and we're going to look at society, the society that we've built out of this conceptual scaffolding. In part one, we'll begin by moving through 3 of the foundational beliefs at the heart of our contemporary understanding of what it is to be a society. Plato's meritocratic republic, Hobbes' social contract, and Rawls' original position. So, in the Republic, Plato sets the template for our modern understanding of a utopian society, which is the sort of hypothetical, idealized society where social order has been perfected and all social problems have been solved. Following Socrates' execution under Athenian democracy, Plato was somewhat suspicious of democracy as a socio-political system. In the parable of the ship from the Republic, Plato compares a democratic society to a ship where every crew member fights for control of the wheel. Nobody actually knows how to navigate, but everyone thinks that they should be in charge. So it's led essentially by mob rule, and the ship just kind of lurches from one direction to another without ever actually making any progress. So a ship, Plato's going to argue, needs a skilled navigator, right? Someone who actually understands where the ship should go and how to get there. And according to Plato, this is the role of the philosopher, because only philosophers have access to true knowledge. And that's where we get to Plato's famous Allegory of the Cave. So, man, one of the most famous thought experiments in philosophy, possibly of all time. So picture prisoners that are chained in an underground cave, and they're watching shadows dancing upon a wall. They've been there their entire lives, so they believe that the shadows represent reality. One day, one of the prisoners breaks free, right? And he crawls up to the surface and sees the real world for the first time. Not just shadows, but the actual objects and sunlight that cast the shadows. The philosopher, according to Plato, is like the escaped prisoner. Through reason and contemplation, the philosopher breaks free from the world of appearances and glimpses the realm of the eternal forms, the perfect, unchanging essences that stand behind all appearances. Justice itself, beauty itself, the good itself, all the stuff that Socrates was trying to find. This should all sound at least vaguely familiar by this point. So the DNA of Plato's cave allegory, you can see it in Descartes' evil demon deceiver. It's basically the plot of The Matrix. It's a story that's been told and retold in one form or another for millennia. The world that we experience is not the real world. There is a greater truth that stands behind it, and for Plato, that truth is the realm of the forms. The philosopher, having seen the ideal universal forms behind all appearances, returns to the cave heavy with wisdom and ready to free his fellow prisoners. But they don't want to be freed. The shadows are all they know. So they kill the philosopher for attempting to free them from the comfortable familiarity of their shadows and illusions. So Plato again here is obviously thinking about the execution of Socrates. Like the philosopher in the cave allegory, Socrates attempted to free the citizens of Athens from their illusions, and he was murdered for his efforts. Semmelweis, back in Module 2, faced a similar fate. Russell was imprisoned twice. Galileo was persecuted by the church. It's not an unreasonable concern, is what I'm saying. So Plato's question in the Republic is this: how do you transform society without getting murdered in the process? And here's the paradox. Plato realizes that in order to rescue society from their illusions, you have to explicitly lie to them. You create a new illusion to replace the shadow play of the cave. This is Plato's doctrine of the noble lie. There must be an agreement to engineer a sort of social mythology and to embed it so deeply within culture that everyone forgets that it's a lie. The noble lie is meant to serve as a founding myth that will be repeated generation after generation without question, and its purpose is to chart a rational course for the ship of state towards a destination of lasting social stability. So Plato suggests a noble lie that he calls the myth of the metals. When people are born, their souls are mixed with one of 4 different metals. Those mixed with gold are the natural rulers, the philosopher kings, who possess knowledge of the forms. Those mixed with silver are what Plato calls auxiliaries. They're the warriors and the military class who enforce the will of the rulers. And those mixed with bronze or iron are the workers, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who perform the essential labor that keeps society running. In the society, children are carefully observed to determine which metal runs through their veins, and then assigned to their proper roles in society on that basis. Occasionally, a bronze child might be born to a golden parent or vice versa, which creates an appearance that there's some sort of socioeconomic mobility. You can move between bronze and gold and vice versa. But fundamentally, this is a rigid class system, maintained by military force and justified by a lie that everyone agrees to believe in. So today, we can read the myth of the metals with its golden souls and its philosopher kings, and it sounds kind of ridiculous, right? But is it that far from what we actually believe? I mean, don't we believe that people succeed based on natural talent and hard work? Don't we sort our children into different educational and career tracks based on standardized testing? Don't we hear every day that CEOs and senators possess some sort of golden qualities called vision and leadership? And don't we feel these beliefs validated on those rare occasions when a child from a working-class bronze family finally receives recognition from those born into the golden world? We just don't call this the myth of the metals. We call it meritocracy. The view that the position that people occupy within a society is based ultimately on their inherent worth. Those with the greatest merit deserve the greatest success. I mean, don't we want to be led by only the best and brightest? Every society ultimately runs on some version of the myth of the metals. And the myth of the metals isn't the only noble lie that we're living with. So the English Civil War, jumping ahead a little bit, left a lasting impression on the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. In all the violence and bloodshed, Hobbes believed that he had witnessed what the true face of humanity looks like once all of the guardrails of civilization have been removed. And it was the face of pure horror for him. Civilization, from Hobbes' perspective, is like a campfire in the middle of a dark forest, right? We're all sitting within this circle of light. And in the light, there's reason and order, rights and laws, comfort and cooperation. But beyond the light, there's a vast and hungry darkness that Hobbes calls the state of nature. Here, beyond the light of civilization, human life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In the state of nature, there are no laws. There's no police, no courts, and there's only one right, the right of nature, which tells us that we must do absolutely anything that is necessary to survive. Murder, theft, betrayal, everything is permitted because everything is survival. Violence isn't the exception, it's the rule. Every stranger is a potential threat. The state of nature is the eternal war of all against all. And being rational individuals, we are driven to escape from the state of nature. We are driven to preserve our own lives. Hobbes argues that this drive for self-preservation constitutes a general law of nature that can be broken down into three individual laws. There's the fundamental law of nature, which states that we all ought to seek peace, right? Or the absence of war, at least, at all costs. Absolute freedom means that everyone is free to murder, steal, and to commit moral atrocities. And so there's a second law of nature that states that peace can only be achieved if we agree to place equal restrictions upon the liberties of everyone. If we want to escape from the state of nature, we have to set down our swords and agree to meet one another across a metaphorical table, and to each voluntarily agree to enter into a rational and binding contract to sacrifice some portion of our liberties in order to secure the security and cooperation of all. But Hobbes, he recognizes that there's always going to be incentives for us to break our contracts, right? To maximize our self-interest at the expense of others. We still carry the state of nature within us. So to keep the flame of civilization lit, some external authority must be established to enforce, through violence if necessary, the third law of nature, that everyone should be bound to keep their contracts. A contract is only as good as its ability to be enforced. Some external enforcement mechanism must be established to ensure that the social contract is enforced by any means necessary. And Hobbes calls this all-powerful enforcer of contracts the Leviathan, an absolute sovereign, a ruler with unlimited power. And so Hobbes, like Plato before him, arrives at the conclusion that civilization can only ultimately be saved from itself if every individual is driven by reason to submit to a coercive and oppressive authority. Plato established the foundational hierarchy that some of us are born to rule and others of us are born to obey. Hobbes accepts this, as do, frankly, most contemporary societies. Plato sets out the template also for how to achieve this. Society is built upon the making of myths, the telling and retelling, eternal retelling of noble lies. So, quick survey. How many of you have actually signed a social contract? Anybody? According to Hobbes, we're all rational, autonomous agents who have emerged from the state of nature to negotiate an agreement to voluntarily sacrifice our liberty in exchange for security. So, of course, we've, signed the contract, right? But that's the problem, isn't it? No one ever asked us to sign the supposedly voluntary contract. It's more of an automatic opt-in, like agreeing to have all your data harvested when you use a website. The fact that you live in a society implies that you assent to the social contract. If you don't agree to the contract, then you're free to leave civilization and return to the state of nature. Except that you're not, because civilization is everywhere. There's no outside to civilization anymore. It's social contracts all the way down. So there is no real sense in which the contract can be voluntary. The truth, as Hobbes recognized, is that there was never any meeting. There was never any contract, and none of us voluntarily agreed to sign it. The social contract is another noble lie that is meant to ensure social stability. And every time we invoke law and order, discuss the rule of law, or appeal to state power to protect us from the threat of chaos or anarchy, we are invoking the social contract. It's everywhere. Hobbes just gives us a name for it. So from Plato, we have a story that naturalizes class hierarchy. And from Hobbes, we have a story where we implicitly agree to submit to an absolute authority. By the 20th century, the essential flaws in these approaches were starting to become kind of obvious. Once a story has been reproduced for a few thousand years, it becomes difficult to significantly revise, right? Solutions tend to invoke tinkering around the edges, minor adjustment here, an additional maxim there, rather than any serious structural work. In practice, this often simply means that we become more subtle and sophisticated storytellers. In the 1970s, the political philosopher John Rawls gave us a new and more progressive way to tell the story of the social contract. We begin in what Rawls calls the original position. Imagine yourself back at Hobbes's negotiation table, right? Pen in hand, you're helping to draft an updated social contract. Your goal is to arrive at a set of principles that will ensure that the resources necessary for human survival and flourishing, food, shelter, healthcare, education, that sort of thing, are all distributed among everyone as fairly as possible. Hobbes would argue that self-interest is going to inevitably guide your preference for some principles over others, right? So Rawls adds in what he calls a veil of ignorance to the process. We enter into the crafting of the social contract with absolutely no prior knowledge about our personal position, status, abilities, disabilities, or any other relevant details that might bias us in any way. We have an equal chance of being rich or poor, female or male, black or white. So any principle we adopt that favors, for example, the wealthy over the poor, has an equal chance of either helping us or hurting us. Self-interest offers us no guide here. So we're forced to build a society out of truly rational principles that are free from personal bias. At least that's the idea. So Rawls thinks that rational people behind the veil of ignorance would choose two principles. First, everyone should have the maximum liberty compatible with equal liberty for everyone else. Second, inequalities should be arranged so that they benefit the least advantaged. If it's going to be inequality, then it should lift up the bottom and not just enrich those at the top. But as Robert Nozick points out, the actual implementation of any system of resource distribution based on Rawls's original position would require something like Hobbes's Leviathan to enforce. And the reason for this is, as Rawls acknowledges, we don't actually start in anything like the original position in real life. We aren't fashioning a perfected society from some position of pure, disembodied rationality outside of the historical facts of generational inequality. We live in a world shaped by centuries of slavery, colonialism, and genocide. The distribution of property, the boundaries of nations, and the concepts of race and citizenship all have already been established before the experiment even begins. We can't simply stipulate that justice swings free from history and call this reason. So Rawls's version of justice as fairness has been tremendously influential among political philosophers. But the world, in practice, looks a lot more like Nozick's night watchman state, where political power is directed towards the maintaining of the existing distribution of resources and not much else. Letting the market decide, as if there's some autonomous agent called the market that is capable of making rational decisions, is yet another contemporary spin on the social contract. that enforces the wall between those with bronze and those with golden souls. Merit, security, fairness, entitlement. These are the stories that we tell and retell ourselves every day in 1,000 invisible ways. They're the common sense of Russell's practical men. So does this mean that we should try to live without myths? No, that's probably impossible. Humans are storytellers. That's how we understand and navigate the world. Stories are the conceptual scaffolding that hold our universe together, right? But it does mean that we have to be very intentional, very critical regarding the kinds of myths that we're making and the subtle ways that we reproduce them without even realizing it. So, in the next section, we're going to revisit Virginia Held, who offers a radical reimagining of the social contract, starting not from rational individuals bargaining for advantage, but from the embodied reality of care and dependency. And I'll see you there.